Well, the guys are on the break now. Don't know where they've gone to. Let's go to the kitchen and get ourselves a treat.
SCV, the moose, and the candy man. Like a freight train rolling, bringing truth bombs down the line. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. Promoting the Southland 1 week at a time. SCV chat starts now.
You ever notice the wind was whipping like all get out there back when we recorded that video a couple years ago? Thank God I took the audio of the background out. Anyway, before we get started, the views and opinions expressed on this broadcast are not necessarily those of the SCV, GEC, any division brigades, camps, or other subsidiaries. Strictly those of us that are expressing them. Hope everybody's having a great week. Seeing folks starting to come on in. Michael C. Hardy, good to have you on. John, nice to see you. Moose, you kind of froze up there for a second on me. J.N. Lowe, everybody else who's coming in. Hope y'all are having a great May the 1st. May Day. What you up to there, Moose?
I'm currently sharing SCV chat on all Confederate friendly group pages, like everybody else should do.
Oh, yeah.
You sound so disappointed.
No, I'm not. I'm not disappointed. It's we'll talk about that later off screen, guys. Y'all, if y'all did not catch it, y'all, we really need to do a behind the scenes show at some point where y'all can see Moose and I jamming out to music and going through and getting images ready. And just really, if you like the goofy stuff that we do, you'll love the behind the scenes. If only we could figure out a way to, I don't know, have it through our website maybe eventually one day. Who knows?
I just got it back up from the sign-in problem, my man. Don't make me have to take it down again.
No, just eventually one day soon there will be something. So for those that don't know, that we have multi ways to watch our show. We're on Facebook.
See.
We're on YouTube.
See.
We're on, that's the most Spanish besides No Fumar that Moose knows.
Yeah,
we are on our website.
Yep.
For those younger in the audience that know what it is, we are on TikTok.
We are.
And we are also on YouTube. And if you paid attention to our post last night, as well as the wonderful Instagram page that we have, we alluded to something last night, and we shared this image out yesterday on the Instagram. And we said we may be talking about something. So guys, we we'll be launching this probably on Wednesday of this week, another poll or petition type thing like we did with our official historian, Michael C. Hardy. And we want everybody, again, audience feedback. We're going to try to do merch again.
Well, every time we've done it, it's been pretty successful.
Right.
We, of course, our first shirt was all the proceeds were donated to the forestry internment. And then the Moose Mania shirts, we donated that to really the website.
Well, this will be going towards the website as well as another venture that Daddy Moose, and I have been started. The T-shirts are not highly overrated, Michael C. Hardy. But yeah, so we are going to potentially be throwing out a little bit of a Trans Mississippi, T-shirt that we've been talking about for years. The boys are back in town. Lawrence, Kansas tour, August 21st, 1863. If you know, you know. To quote my buddy Travis, it was a hot day in August. Fun fact about this, of course, on here we've got Bloody Bill Anderson as well as Captain Quantrell, but the other three gentlemen are known men who participated in Lawrence, Kansas. Lawrence, Kansas, and when we finish this series that we're on, is a good episode for us to study because it was a retaliation from those murdering, thieving, dirty, evil Yankees capturing a bunch of Southern women and putting them in a jail that literally rotted down amongst them and killed them. So,
going back to Michael C. Hardy's comment, our lovely official SCV chat historian, he was talking about Adam had a comment saying Moose needs a haircut. And he was like, they're overrated. And then someone posted in the group chat, Moose no haircut, ha ha ha.
I think that was Thomas.
Probably Thomas. I don't understand how he keeps getting access. And then Adam said, sorry, unkept hairstyle. It's what I'm rocking right now. I can only pull this off for a couple more years, and then I'll have to get a serious haircut when I get a serious job like GCB over here.
Well, hold on one moment. Hold on. You fill for a second.
Okay.
I'm actually going to defend your hairstyle for a second.
Oh, okay. Well, this is extremely selfish to talk about, and if you know me, I don't like to do stuff like this, but today is my camp's 30th anniversary. So if you could go like our post on the Sons of Confederate Veterans Samuel H. Poe Camp number 255 Facebook page, that'd really mean a lot to me. We shared it on the SCV chat page. My camp has been around for 30 years. We rechartered in 1993. And fun fact, we are one of the last camps that the SCV great Dr. McCain signed off on before his passing. We take a lot of great pride in that. And we've been around a lot. Dad is my father, Forrest Dawes, the historian in chief, has been going through our camp history recently. And there are so many things that I was so young I don't remember. Like at one of our first ever memorial services, for those who don't know, I'm a fourth generation SCV member. My great grandfather was in the organization. My grandfather's in the organization. Of course, my father, and then me. One of our first ever memorial events, my father found a little bit of the fact that my great grandfather spoke at that meeting, at that event. So it has been a blessed year, especially this month and last month. We had a great time. And, of course, really going into our camp history like never before. It has been amazing and a blessing and so many good memories. And I know everybody else feels like this, and I talk about the Southern Brotherhood that SCV has. And the family is really the heart of the family. The camp is really the heart of that family. So we took a lot of great pride in it. And we hope to be around 30 more years where I will probably more likely still be the adjutant. For those who do not know,
while you're elected for adjutant, you're elected for life. All right, so everybody's talking about Moose's unkept hair. I've gotten what my evidence uploaded for why you don't need a haircut.
Are you bet?
For those that don't know, that's a young Robert E. Lee. You can see it's kind of got the same receding line and swoop off to the side. Here's another picture of Robert E. Lee on the eve of the war.
Did you just compare me and Robert E. Lee's receding hairline?
I thought you would take it as a compliment.
Considering he's one of my most looked up to people, I admire General Lee. He was a good Christian man and a good man all around. I guess I will take that as a compliment. You know, you and Adam have started this, and I don't know where Adam got it from. I don't know if he got it from you, but Adam, in the middle of a live stream we were doing a couple months ago at Elm Springs, just randomly turns to me right before a picture. You look like a young Robert E. Lee. Your hair curls out of control, and you're having a receding hairline. And I was like, wow, thank you. That's what every 24-year-old man wants to hear.
I mean, I think you could even rock the stash.
No. You've seen my facial hair.
Or at least the sideburns.
You want to hear something funny? And I'll share it right here. I did rock mutton chops and the sideburns my freshman year of college. I grew them down to like right here, and they were pretty thick. I was called Elvis. Jack says my hair is historically accurate. Thank you, Jack. Once people told me I had the hair of Nathan Bedford Forrest. That's cool, David. Moose, you need to rock some sideburns and look like Lee and Elvis.
As long as he doesn't sing like Elvis.
No, we all learned that Moose can't sing.
I mean, as in that Moose doesn't need to sing like Elvis sang. Like Elvis sang wonderfully. Moose doesn't need to sing at all.
If you heard kind of not the first episode really of SCV Chat, but really kind of the back burner or where we started getting the ideas during COVID to live stream events. If you can go, I'll go ahead and embarrass myself.
Nope. We're not talking about it. We're not talking about it. Nope.
Connor Bond's Facebook page.
So anyway,
so we're at it again.
we're not talking about that. If they missed out on a wonderful once in a lifetime birth of SCV Chat, the reason why I'm saying that, Moose, is that page in roughly 40 some odd days, it's going to be taken down. So yeah,
counting it down, boss.
No. Just getting ready to take it down. A new page is being turned. But
hey,
yeah.
Someone said, our official historian says, as I get older, I can replace him as Albert Pike.
Yeah. Michael, when I read that, I was like, he does look like Albert Pike, which, would be a good episode on who do our SCV members look like.
Oh, dig nabbit. Someone just reminded me this is going in the gag reel.
Okay. So, anyway, we are back on our first Monday, back on schedule with what we are doing. For those that are just now learning about what we've done, you can go on our YouTube and our Facebook page and rewatch some of the stuff we've done. The first half of this year, the first Monday, has been dedicated to the heroes of our heroes, the Southern influences on the American Revolution, be it culture, which we haven't really gotten into, but at least the Southerners that are very, very influential on it. We've covered the Swamp Fox, the Battle of Kings Mountain, and diving into the Scotch-Irish culture that was the inner Civil War of at least the South Carolina campaign. We've talked about John Paul Jones, father of the American Navy, who was from Scotland but settled in Virginia. What else am I missing there, Moose?
You just beat me to it. I was going to our schedule right now. Let's see here. I think you really got everything. Leesville, Virginia, we did that.
Right, where we talked about Robert E. Lee's family, his father, and specifically his, I believe it was his great uncle, Richard Henry Lee, who proposed that the colonies ought to be free and free and independent states, rather, capital S, not lowercase s, like modern academia and even the Northerners believed in 1861. Continue, Miss.
We also did a very interesting take on a movie review when we did The Patriot.
We did a good job on that.
We did a good job. We considering how off topic we get on our movie reviews.
And how off topic we got in this episode itself.
We get off topic on almost every episode at some point. Do we want to talk about our future episodes?
Yeah, coming up next month, I believe it's the voice of the American Revolution. Patrick, I was just about to say Patrick Swayze, which would have been great for the gag reel. Patrick Henry, who of course said, "Give me liberty and give me death." In June, we are talking about the pen of the American Revolution, Thomas Jefferson. Is that correct?
All right. Yes. Yeah, no, you're right.
In July, we're talking about secession itself. Went to public school, that kind of came out. But again, the legality of it in 1776 and in 1861 and in 2023. Because if the South was right in 1861, which they were, it's because America was right in 1776.
This might be one of our longest series on the show. Over 100 episodes, and this is the only time we have done 9 consecutive shows on an overarching topic.
Consecutive months, not consecutive shows. Not even consecutive months. We break it up with the Hearth and Home and Carl episodes.
Yeah, bless their heart.
Yeah. So.
Everybody's still talking about my hair.
I'm really loving that Jason, or Commander-in-Chief Jason Bashir's resident T-Rex said that Moose can almost pull off the Little Debbie look.
Commander, Connor picked your picture out for the website. Go look at it.
He's hungry for our heritage.
He's hungry for our heritage. We didn't use that one. I can say that much.
Oh, we are now.
I'm going to have to go behind you because I gave you, you have the login information. So me and you are going to have to go back and forth editing this picture of the Commander-in-Chief. One, he's hungry for our heritage. And then this random zoom in at a speech he gave, a program he gave.
No. He was at lunch during the Heritage Luncheon at National Reunion. Speaking of National Reunion, division and national reunions are coming up. I believe Tennessee's already had their division reunion.
Yeah.
Mississippi has ours in roughly 40 some odd days. Same time that Alabama is having theirs. I think Florida has theirs soon after. But it all culminates with the National Reunion in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Get registered if you have not registered. I got my copy of The Veteran in yesterday, which, by the way, Commander-in-Chief, great article.
I haven't got mine yet.
I'm still thumbing through it. The very back of the magazine are the constitutional amendments, and we've got some constitutional amendments to vote on this year. That takes a good portion of our time. But our Constitution is how we rule and govern this organization. So definitely everybody needs to read those. Talk to your camps if you're a delegate, see how your camp wants you to vote, and let's have a great reunion.
They're talking now. They went from, I look like the Little Debbie. I'm being confused as a transvestite?
More like Big Deborah. Anyway, Moose is dying, coughing there on the back. So
I did not need that in my life today.
So tonight we are getting ready to talk about one of the mainmost heroes of our heroes, at least for sure a hero of General Robert Edward Lee. Lee practically married in as close as he could to the man George Washington, the father of our country, first in war, first in peace, and first in the heart of his countrymen. Trying to pull up a picture of GW right now, same one that we used in the earlier portion of the video. Boom, that is a artist rendition of George Washington at the surrender of Yorktown. I've always loved his headquarters flag, which is there immediately beside him. But yeah, George Washington. George Washington was very important to the South and very important to the Confederacy. In fact, he was so important that he was put on the Great Seal. That's George Washington right there, in case you didn't know that. So next time you're at a bar and somebody says, "Hey, do you know who was on the Great Seal of the Confederate States of America?" You could say, "Yes, that's George Washington on a horseback, flanked by cotton and corn and tobacco and other very important agricultural necessary things because we were a agrarian society back then." You want to talk first, Moose? You want me to?
No, you can go ahead. I don't have much to say tonight. You can go ahead.
Okay, so George Washington. Where do we start on George Washington? Well, Moose, I'm going to let you hit some of the more biographical points on him a little bit later on. Do you want to share something of a very interesting article that I found that talks about Washington and some of the connections that he had to the Confederacy? Of course, we have mentioned that George Washington was, or Robert E. Lee rather, married, into the Custis family, the George, or well, the the as close as he could to Martha Washington, her family and stuff like that. Just a couple of things. There were several members of Washington's family besides Robert E. Lee that were connected to George Washington, or connected to the War for Southern Independence. Several nephews, from his brother, either Alexander or his other brother, served and fought for the Confederacy in some way, shape, or form. There was one set of that would have been great nephews of Washington who were hung as spies. There was the Washington ancestral home, or his brother's, one of his brother's homes, that was raided by Philip Sheridan in, I believe it was 1864. Horses were stolen, pigs were killed, just the normal looting, pillaging, murdering, raping, no good for nothing Yankees. Things of that nature. So the family was directly, affected by the war. In fact, if you go to Yorktown, it may still be on display, I'm not sure. But there was a time when Robert E. Lee actually used Washington's marquee tent, I do believe, and that it was Robert E. Lee's son who ended up giving it to the American government after it was recovered after the family got Arlington back, after they had to sue the federal government because those, everybody say it with me, evil, murdering, stealing Yankees stole the property from the family. Jason says, tune in Thursday for Commander comments and find out something about the Great Seal. Ooh, I will have to learn in or tune in.
I'll have to learn.
That too.
Oh, yeah, gag reel material. That's not me.
Anyway, Washington was born on February 22nd, 1732, and he died December 14th, 1779. Washington, of course, was commander of the Continental Army, but he did a lot more than just that. That's pretty much what he's known for. In Washington's early life, he was born. The Washington family. Well, I'll get to that in a second. The Washington family was a wealthy Virginia family. It made its money mainly through land speculation, cultivation of tobacco, and things of that. According to the family's history, John Washington, who was Washington's great-great-grandfather, immigrated to these shores in 1656 from North Hampshire, England. And while in the English colony of Virginia, he accumulated some 5,000 acres of land. That was on the Little Hunting Creek as well as on the Potomac River. As we mentioned earlier, Washington was born February 22nd, and he was born at Pope's Creek in Westmoreland County. there in Virginia. He was the first of 6 children from his father Augustine and Mary Ball Washington. I believe Mary Ball was Augustine's second wife, because he had older half, well, it had to be because he had older half
Yes.
brothers who were set to inherit with the primogeniture. Try saying that 5 times fast. Or primogeniture way English law was set up. You know, the eldest son is the one who inherits everything. Then, you know, so on and so forth, down and down. His father was a justice of the peace and a prominent public figure who had, who was first married to Jane Butler. The family moved to Little Hunting Creek in 1735. In 1738, they moved to Ferry Farm near Fredericksburg, Virginia, on the Rappahannock River. And that is when Augustine died in 1743. Washington inherited Ferry Farm, but his older half brother Lawrence inherited Little Hunting Creek and renamed it Mount Vernon. Lawrence was a real big role model for Washington after his father died. We'll get into that a little bit later. Washington did not have a formal education, but he did receive a rudimentary one from Appleby Grammar School in England. No, actually, excuse me, my eyes got crossed on me there. His elder brothers received at the Appleby Grammar School in England. Washington attended the Lower Church School in Hartfield, where he learned mathematics, trigonometry, and land surveying. And he became a talented draftsman and maps maker. By early adulthood, he was writing with considerable force and precision. And, in his pursuit of admiration, status, and power, his writing displayed little wit or humor. Washington, again, as I said, he visited Lawrence as best that he could because Lawrence was a role model to him. So he visited him at Mount Vernon and Belvoir, which belonged to Lawrence's father-in-law, William Fairfax. William Fairfax was a cousin of Lord Fairfax over in Virginia, or over in the old country. And he was pretty much managing the state for him. In 1748, Washington spent a month surveying the Fairfax's land in the Shenandoah Valley. The following year, he received a surveyor's license from the College of William and Mary when he was 17. Even though he had not served at the customary apprenticeships, Fairfax appointed him the surveyor of Culpeper County, Virginia. And he took his oath on July 20th, 1749. He began familiarizing himself with the frontier region, and though he was reassigned from the job in 1750, he continued to survey west of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He made enough money that by 1752, he'd bought almost 1,500 acres of land in the valley. So his total acreage was 2,315 acres. In 1751, Washington made his only trip abroad when he accompanied Lawrence to Barbados, hoping that the climate would cure his brother's tuberculosis. While down there, Washington contracted smallpox, and it immunized him and left his face slightly scarred. And let me see if I can pull up the picture that I put in earlier. That's Washington's death mask. And if you look over here on the left-hand side, that may just be the plaster. That could also be scarring attributed to smallpox. Of course, there's also one on the chin. Again, could be scarring from the plaster being, so old, but it also could be from the smallpox. I digress. Lawrence, his brother, was adjutant general of the Virginia militia. When Lawrence died, the lieutenant governor of Virginia appointed George Washington as a major, and he commanded one of the 4 militia districts. And this is where it kind of gets a little bit interesting for George Washington with the French and Indian War. Isn't it there, Moose?
Very interesting.
Why don't you talk about that for a second?
Oh, well, thank you. Let me get to my notes on it. So happy we talked about this and discussed this backstage so I could be prepared.
You never know when I'm going to throw it over to you there, buddy.
No, thanks for that, by the way. So during the French and Indian War, George Washington kind of had a, how do I say it, a rocky start, to say the least.
Well, he started the whole dang war.
Yeah. So to say he had a rocky start would be an understatement. So, of course, after he accidentally started the French and Indian War, something I liked about him is after that, he was greatly embarrassed, of course. His reputation had a big smear mark on it, and a lot of people thought his military career was over, if I'm not mistaken.
Let's backtrack on how he started the war, and then we can get into that. So Washington was sent out surveying, and it's because the French were trying to take over the Ohio Valley, and Washington and a group of native allies end up getting right there by the French and capture a French diplomat, and somebody shoots somebody, and let's not bicker about who killed who.
Wasn't it a Native American tribe that they joined forces with, kill somebody?
Right.
If I'm thinking about something else.
Yeah, no, you're right. It was a group. He was supposed to make peace with the Iroquois Confederacy, gather intelligence about the French forces there in the valley. And anyway, I can't remember. There were several different tribes that were with him when they were intercepted by the French patrol. And anyway, they, again, to make it light, they killed the ambassador.
Yeah.
And that started essentially the French and Indian War. And Washington was given his command. They were at they created a defensive. They went back into the Ohio River Valley, and they created a defensive area.
Fort Necessity.
Fort Necessity, exactly. And pretty much they were outnumbered. There were British forces at that point, along with the colonial forces. And anyway, when he had to surrender Fort Necessity, he pretty much signed it. He didn't read French.
You talk about his surrender.
Yeah, and he was blamed, and Washington blamed his translator for not communicating it. But pretty much they said that because they found Joseph Colon de Joinville, who was the diplomatic messenger, was killed and scalped, that it's Washington's fault that the war began.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, he was still a very young man, very inexperienced in combat at this time. And when he made Fort Necessity, if I'm not mistaken, again, I'm doing all this off the top of my head. I didn't get to prepare like I would normally get to today. Luckily, I studied Washington a good bit and remember some of it. It did not have a good fortification, and its surrounding areas, if you will, left it very vulnerable to attack. And yet Washington kind of got in over his head there for a second. And he signed the surrender papers. It did not paint him in a good light. And again, this was a big smear on his reputation. Do you want to talk about anything before I jump into what I'm about to say?
Well, I'm going to add a picture of modern day reconstruction of Fort Necessity on here really quickly. While we're talking about Fort Necessity, the actual on down here, the French attack, negotiation, surrender. The Washington ends up getting cashiered over this. His military district is here we go.
There it is. Lieutenant Commander in Chief, if I'm not mistaken, during this time, he is 22. So a very young man. I know I made my fair of mistakes at 22, and I didn't have all that responsibility on me. Continue. I was just answering a question while I had it on my mind.
Yeah, so he gets cashiered. His command is end up separated out. You know, he's tries and tries and tries to get back into the militia, or some type of military command, because that's the way, you know, the Virginia gentry did it. Even the English aristocracy, you know, you look at the officers and stuff like that. You know, he was trying to get back into it.
Mhm.
Anyway, Washington, after he's cashiered, he sits out for a little while until 1755, I believe.
Could
When
I add
Washington,
something in there
yeah,
in
go
that
ahead.
time period he's out?
Yeah.
So something about Washington is that he recognized his faults very well. And after this embarrassment, he spent the whole time between when this happened till he got back in and got, you know, away back into this life. He spent every minute trying to find military documents, studies on war, studies on battles, studies about the military in general, to the point where he became an expert at a very young age because he read so much. I can't remember the historical document that I'm referring to off the top of my head, but it said that he, during this time, obsessed over it. That's all he thought about. That's all he tried to improve upon. He used, you know, heart and determination to over to gain experience in a very quick time. He was a very quick learner, and that's what he did for those. How long was he out of the militia? A year, a couple months? I can't remember.
So Fort Necessity and the surrender that happened was in 54. So yeah, a couple months.
Okay, so yeah, he spent those whole couple of months 100% dedicated to being like our Lieutenant Commander in Chief, Walter D. Donnie Kennedy says, a homeschooled military expert. He spent all his time, he spent a good bit of money and change on getting these books and materials to learn. And as soon as he got in the battlefield, if I'm not mistaken, he also picked a lot of the military leaders' brains.
Right.
Constantly ask questions.
Right, and that goes on to the next point. He volunteered to serve as an aide for General Braddock in his upcoming campaign in 1755. Braddock, during the campaign, though, tried to divide the army in two, and that was on Washington's recommendation, because he knew that the native forces that the French were allied with were quick hitting, fast hitting, and he needed to have a flying column on his own. But you know, with everything else, with just like the Oregon Trail video game, if you remember that, and just like in our own war, dysentery ran amok, and the slower column ended up getting ambushed. During that ambush, 2/3 of the British forces and colonial forces were casualties, including Braddock. Braddock ends up dying of his wounds, and Washington pretty much, with and still very ill, with Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Gage, they rallied the survivors, formed a rear guard, and got out of there. They were able to disengage and retreat. In fact, Washington, who had become, sort of a mentee of Braddock, had his men bury Braddock in the middle of the road and then march and drive the wagons over him so that his body would not be found by the natives and mutilated, so that he would, stay there. During the engagement, though, even though, again, Washington still very ill with dysentery, had two horses shot from under him, and his hat and coat were bullet pierced. I believe it was like 7 times or something like that. That he had a
hole shot through his jacket that somehow miraculously missed him.
Yeah, divine providence.
Yeah.
The Virginia Regiment of Militia eventually gets reconstituted later on, about a month later. Washington is again appointed as its commander with the rank of colonel. Washington clashed over seniority almost immediately because seniority it's based on even in WBTS who got the promotion first.
Yeah. But his reputation did a great rebound after
Right.
this.
Well, I mean, with saving as much as he could after that, horrible thing with Braddock. Anyway, he continues on. Washington is very impatient during this time to go on an offensive campaign, and he was somewhat convinced that he would have gotten a royal commission had he pressed on with it. Didn't happen though. In 1758, they were reassigned to the Forbes expedition to capture a French fort that I'm not going to try to butcher the name of. Washington is breveted as a brigadier general. He's given one of 3 brigades that would have assaulted the fort, but they get there and the French had abandoned the fort. So before the assault was even launched. Washington only saw a friendly fire incident that accidentally left 14 dead and 26 injured. The war lasted another 4 years, and then Washington resigned his commission, went back to Mount Vernon. Under his command, the Virginia Regiment was able to defend 300 miles of frontier against 20 Indian attacks in 10 months. He increased the professionalism of the regiment and increased the number from 300 to 1,000 men. Though he failed to get his royal commission, he did gain self-confidence, leadership skills, and invaluable knowledge of British military tactics that would
come in handy later.
Couple of years. Yeah, that's foreshadowing.
That is the most foreshadowing thing I've ever heard in history.
Before we get into his marriage, civilian, and political life, Washington tried, because we mentioned the primogeniture and stuff like that, and because he became connected with some high-class people, Washington got his hands on as many books on etiquette as he could find. It's often said that Washington did not shake hands with people. He had his own book of maxims. One of them is don't stand so close to somebody to where you may offend them by the spittle of your speech. There's actually a couple of copies of it, flying around there.
Did you know that he was very soft-spoken? He wasn't a loud man,
right? And that was one of the things. But anyway, on January 6, 1759, Washington, at the age of 26, married Martha Dandridge Custis, a 27-year-old widow of wealthy plantation owner Daniel Park Custis. The marriage took place at Martha's estate. She was an intelligent, gracious, and experienced in managing a planter's estate, and they created a happy marriage. They raised John Park Custis Jackie and Martha Park Custis Patsy, the children from the previous marriage. And later, Jackie's children, Eleanor Park Custis, Nellie, and George Washington Park Custis, Washi, who I believe was...
if I can intervene.
Go ahead, interject, jump on
Well,
in.
I just again, I'm doing all this off the top of my head because of work today got out of my head. So anything that pops up in my head that I think is useful, I want to say it before I forget it. But Washington and his wife could not have children. And so it is, by all historical accounts, and I am getting this from Mount Vernon, their research, if I'm not mistaken, off the top of my head. He was a very loving stepfather and took that role very seriously because he wanted children in his life. And so John Custis, did I say that right?
No, Custis.
Custis, I'll get it right someday. And Martha, of course, the kids from the previous marriage were very dear to his heart. Martha would not live a long time at all. I believe she passed away at 12, maybe, if I'm thinking off the top of my head.
Yeah,
and
Patsy.
Patsy.
It was 17.
17. And then John died at 28. And so he couldn't have kids, and then he had the only thing that he had for kids taken away. And it is by all accounts that he was an even more loving grandfather, and again raised these kids of his stepson like his own. He was very good with children, and he at many times would rather have probably been with his children when they kept trying to get poor G Dubs in politics later on after the war.
Yeah, and George Washington Parke Custis, who was John Parke, Jackie's son, was the father of Mary Lee, Robert E. Lee's wife. That's where it comes in. And he was raised by Washington, and he's buried at where? Arlington. Yeah, because those Yankees stole it. Anyway, but yeah, the smallpox is what believed that rendered him sterile.
Yeah.
But it's also that Martha may have had a troubled pregnancy with Patsy, and so it's could have been both of them.
Yeah.
Washington ended up, I believe, renting Mount Vernon from his sister-in-law, and eventually took over the ownership of it near Alexandria, Virginia. And he took up the life of a planter, and he grew tobacco, wheat. They fished. They're the Townsend Company, the Revolutionary War sutler. They have a very interesting video on how they used to catch and preserve shad fish out of the Potomac River, filmed at Mount Vernon. It's a cooking episode. It's very good. Washington would eventually get into politics. He would represent the region in the House of Burgesses. And while in there, he began, really being the gentleman statesman that we know him to be. Washington played a critical or a central role before and during, obviously, the American Revolution. He was openly opposed to taxes issued by the British Parliament without proper representation. He was one of the colonists who was also angered by the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which banned American settlement west of the Allegheny Mountains, and also protected the British fur trade. He believed that the Stamp Act of 1765 was an act of oppression, and helped celebrate the repeal the following year. Pretty much the more that the British did, Washington was fighting against and getting ticked off to. Washington is eventually sent to he attends the First Virginia Convention, where he was selected as a delegate to the First Continental Congress. And eventually, there's one scene that I love out of John Adams.
Yes, I know what you're talking about.
That I don't know if it's real or not, but Washington, at least in the Second Continental Congress, when he was there, he showed up in uniform. Well, this scene takes place in the First Continental Congress when all these different things that the British Parliament's doing to punish Boston. He's wearing a black mourning armband, and would love to know if that's factual or not. I haven't been able to find out in my research.
I haven't either, but it's one of my favorite scenes.
But John Adams asks him, "You're in mourning. Why are you in mourning?" And he said, "I'm in mourning for Boston."
And John Adams was so touched about this, he did make a mental note, and that mental note would come back in the form.
If that is accurate, if he did that,
if it is accurate,
I mean that could be just something that Hollywood came up with that would look good. But Washington stood at around, I believe, 6'1", 6'2", somewhere around there.
6'2".
Showed up. Say again.
6'2".
Yeah. Showed up every day in his uniform, his militia uniform, and he posed a very cutting, striking figure during the Congress. And when it was decided to create a continental army for the defense of the colonies against the British, the question was who would become commander-in-chief. And John Hancock, who had just been selected as the president of the Congress, thought it was going to be him. Well, John Adams and others knew that the success of any type of defense or eventually independence, the Virginia, who is the most populous colony, had to, and the oldest colony, had to be a part of it. They had to want to supply troops, supply money, things like that. So obviously they needed a Virginian, because also Virginia would sway the rest of the South. Instead of it just being a New England rebellion, it would be an entire continental struggle for independence. So Washington was unanimously elected as commander-in-chief of the Congress on June 15th, 1775.
Fun fact, his opening on the Continental Congress led to the rising star Thomas Jefferson replacing him in the Continental Congress.
Right. Without Jefferson, Jefferson replacing Washington, who knows who would have written the Declaration?
Probably John Adams.
And he was obnoxious and disliked. Washington, and that's a direct quote. Washington on the 16th gave his acceptance speech. He declined a salary, even though he was later reimbursed for his expenses, and was officially commissioned on June 19th, and then began to move on. And he went to took command of the siege of Boston in June of 1775. Washington chose his staff. Not going to go through everybody who was there. Had the cannons taken from Fort Ticonderoga and shipped down to Boston, and all of a sudden the British look up and they're surrounded by guns bristling, from the Dorchester Heights. And they're like, "Oh crap, we got to go." So they left. Tried an invasion of Quebec, didn't work out.
Some rough years.
Yeah, well, one rough, expedition. Anyway, the next major campaign is in 1776, and that is the Battle of Long Island. Washington, God love him, is there on Long Island, and they've been worried about these barbarians from different provinces of what is now Germany, especially those from Hesse-Kassel, because George III was the Hanoverian king from Hanover. He also ruled part of Hanover, which was a German province. So he brought in German mercenaries. Anyway, digress. Pretty much, they end up getting flanked. Washington's army consisted of about 23,000, mostly raw recruits. Howe's troops, was about 32,000, so they were, outnumbered. General Howe, he landed 20,000 troops in Brooklyn. He began approaching Washington's fortifications, and again, he gets flanked. During that flanking attack, 1,500 Patriot casualties were held, while the British only suffered 400, and Washington had to retreat. He had one of his generals, William Heath, to get every rivercraft in the area, and overnight they crossed the East River under the darkness to Manhattan Island. It was a miracle that the army was able to be saved without loss of any lives or material. Emboldened by this, pretty much General Howe tries to negotiate a peace. Washington declined because the General Howe referred to him as George Washington Esquire instead of by a military rank, and Washington was slapped in the face by it. Pretty much, Washington is able to pull the army out of Manhattan Island across the Hudson River to Fort Lee, despite the fact that Fort Lee eventually gets captured. Washington and the Continental Army are on the run. That 23,000 man army by this point is reduced to 5,400 troops. And they retreat all the way through New Jersey. We then get to December of 1776, and Washington is in he's in quite the pickle because at the end of December, most of the troops who remain, their enlistments are up. And Washington has to do something to make these men want to re-enlist to come back. And in almost what some historians have said, suicidal mission.
It was definitely on there.
Washington on Christmas night, and I hope Carl's still watching, pulls out his spatula and says, "Come on, boys, follow me. We're going to cross the Delaware." It's just for you, Carl. They cross the Delaware River, and he wants them to attack the Hessian garrison at Trenton for a couple of reasons. One, the army needs a victory. Second, the army is not that well supplied. He thinks he can get the supplies from the captured Hessians and bring them back home. That includes winter uniforms, food, things of that. And he wants to embolden the army and show the world that, yes, professional Europeans can be defeated by us. Washington, and he splits his force. They get all the Durham boats that they can to transport the army across. He decides that Christmas night is going to be the best time because the Hessians would be up the entire day on Christmas, drinking, rabble-rousing, and having a good time. They cross at McConkey's Ferry, 40 men per vessel. Because of the harsh wind, hail, waters, they did not make it across in time. They made it across with no losses, but they did not make it across in time. The plan was to strike them at early dawn. Mm-hmm. In order to be there at early dawn, they had to be over by a little bit, I believe, after midnight, and then do a forced march. They couldn't make it. One column under Nathaniel Greene took the ferry road. Washington took the river road, and the ferry road went up, river road went in, so it was going to be a pincer maneuver on the town. Luckily for Washington and the American cause, the Hessians were still asleep. They're able to silence the guard shack that was watching over, and then they began attacking. They ended up being very victorious. In fact, the British commander, John Rawl, was killed during that, and before he died, he surrendered to Washington. The Hessians had 22 men killed, 83 wounded, and 850 captured with supplies. Washington, how many did they lose, Moose?
0.
It was a Christmas miracle indeed.
Well,
go ahead.
You also got to remember, like, during this time in war, winter attacks were extremely rare because of how suicidal it was. And for an unequipped army, for what they considered more of, for lack of a better term, a bunch of hillbillies with guns,
farmers and pitchforks,
they did not expect that Washington or the Continental Army had anywhere near the right equipment to even do this job. And because even a professional army, someone that's been in the game for a long time, like Great Britain, it was still suicidal. Like, they would stop battling in the winter.
Well, even into the war between the states.
Yeah, they still did that, if I'm not mistaken.
They went into winter quarters. Your campaign months were in your spring, summer, and late fall or early fall. You went into winter quarters because it's the rainy season in most of the United States of America. It's where we get most of our rain, unless you're in the Pacific Northwest, and that's every single day. But the roads would become impassable. For our War Between the States buffs, look at the mud march that Burnside sent Army of the Potomac on after the debacle at Fredericksburg. Federal debacle, our great victory. But look at that. This is before, solid pavement in most of your country areas. So you get sleet, rain, snow, hail, mixture all in between, which the Americans suffered under during the crossing of the Delaware. The road's going to be muddy. By the time that you put 2,000 men down a road and then try to bring up horse-drawn artillery, that's why attacks never happened. Washington took a huge gamble, A, attacking during the winter, B, attacking a superior, at least trained at that time, Hessian force. They weren't British, but Hessian force.
Yeah.
And then, crossing a river, halfway frozen river at night, just the odds were against him. I mean, it's 100-1 victory. And you're right, Doug. The Battle of Murfreesboro did take place between December 31st and January 2nd. Again, it's an oddity that
It's very odd.
I mean, it is very, very, very rare that sort of thing happens. Anywho, Washington goes back into New Jersey, and begins going into winter camp. In July of 1777, again going back into the way the campaigning season was, Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne led his army on the Saratoga campaign from Quebec. He gets his butt kicked by Benedict Arnold. Benedict Arnold, of course, gets shot in the leg, and somebody else takes credit for it, which pissed him off. In the meantime, Washington meets a young man who snuck over from the old world, dressed as a woman, named Gilbert du Motier, Marquis de Lafayette, who volunteers to serve as one of Washington's aides. Got to remember, during this time, Ben Franklin's been over yonder in France trying to get French help for him. The Battle of Saratoga eventually gets French recognition and help. But while that's happening, General Howell has left New York City, and he tries to capture Philadelphia instead of going up the Hudson River to help General Johnny. Just like what the Federals thought, you capture the capital, the rebellion dies. Washington ends up getting in a couple of battles, Brandywine Creek, where he again is outflanked. The Battle of Germantown, again gets outflanked and has to sent reeling back. At this point, George Washington goes into winter quarters. His army has regrown up to 1,100 men, and they camp at Valley Forge near a little bit north of Philadelphia. And then they go into camp in December 1777. That winter alone, they suffered 2,000 to 3,000 deaths from cold, disease, lack of food, lack of clothing, lack of shelter. But meanwhile, the British were comfortable in the capital of Philadelphia. Of course, Congresses, went somewhere else. What's worse is that they're so close to Philadelphia, the British are buying items from the colonists, and they're paying in pounds sterling. And that helps devalue the American paper currency. Washington can't buy anything, and very soon the Woodlands were they ran out of they ran out of deer, squirrel, rabbits, turkeys. You imagine it, possum, they ate it. It got so bad that by February the morale was so low that desertions began happening. In the meantime, Washington is begging the Continental Army to, send us something, send us food, anything. Congress, couldn't do anything. What really helps, though, while at Valley Forge is a German baron, Friedrich Wilhelm von Steuben, shows up, and he again offers to help Washington. And Washington turns it over to von Steuben, and von Steuben begins taking this group of, as we've said, rough ragtag farmers with pitchforks, and begins drilling them. And he first drills a squad and then a platoon, and then he sends drill sergeants out. And really, the drill manual that von Steuben created for the American Army and the structure that he created is still what's used in most American military today. Fun fact. Anyway, lucky for us, as we mentioned, Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne's defeat at the Battle of Saratoga prompted the French to sign a treaty of alliance with us, which was ratified in May, and the French, declared war against Great Britain. When that happens, soon after, the British evacuate Philadelphia for New York. The Continental Congress moves back in, and Washington chose to a partial attack to hit the British at the Battle of Monmouth. Now, the problem that happened at the Battle of Monmouth, one of his underlings, Charles Lee, no kin to Robert E. Lee, didn't fully attack, but at the end of the battle, it was a draw, which is huge because, one, you have to think of where the British are sending their troops from. Where are they sending their troops from, Harrison? That's right, Great Britain. And a draw for the British is not, they have to have victories. Their chain of supply, troops coming in, draws don't win wars, especially if you are an invading force. So they have a draw, but also it shows that the American military the Continental Army that came out of Valley Forge could stand toe-to-toe with the British. And in fact, the British had to continue their retreat onto New York. Huge change in the morale there with the Army. Washington eventually does go back into New York and has... sorry about that. Something popped up on my screen and I can't read my notes.
Don't you hate it when that happens?
I really do. After the Continentals recapture Philadelphia, the governor of Philadelphia, General Benedict Arnold, gets in some trouble with the Continental Congress. And Washington was a fan of Arnold because Arnold was a general that would fight. He proved that being wounded twice. And everything like that, but Arnold was arrogant, and would continue to get passed over for promotion when he thought he deserved it, and may have, rightfully so. But Washington, convinces Arnold to stand the court-martial, clear his name, and once his name is cleared, he gave him a command, and he did. He gave him the command of West Point, where the United States Military Academy is. Arnold still gets, is still bitter, and his wife, Washington ends up having to pull his support during Arnold's court-martial, and that drives Arnold over the edge. Arnold's wife, who was from an aristocratic, they say 33% of the colonies were in favor of the revolution, 33 were in the middle, and 33 were Tories. Peggy Shippin's family borders on that, leaning towards Tory area. Anyway, she introduces Arnold to John Andre. John Andre and he eventually make a deal where Arnold will give over West Point along with the plans of the defense. In exchange, he would receive a commandership in the British Army and would be used to destroy Washington and everything like that. John Andre gets caught. Arnold runs away. Washington gets ticked. Andre gets hanged. Arnold is a traitor. Yeah, how about that? anyway, we approach now 1778. We're trying to skip over a lot of stuff. The French eventually make it over here. They supply troops, and more importantly, they supply their navy. The Southern campaign has been going on, and Kings Mountains happened, and the Swamp Fox is going and kicking butt and taking aim, and George Cornwallis has to retreat. And he ends up retreating to a place called Yorktown. Washington originally wants to retake New York. Now that he's reinforced by the French Navy and the French Army, but he's end up, and that's one thing I love about Washington. Washington, in his
Very
council
smart man.
he would listen to his younger officers and see what they had to say, and if they could convince him, he would do that. So Washington is sitting there, and he's like, okay, y'all have convinced me. We'll go to Yorktown and capture Cornwallis, and they do. Siege happens. Cornwallis surrenders. Cornwallis does, when it comes time to actually surrender, Washington, when he's negotiating it, offers the same terms that Charlestown surrendered under. When Charlestown, South Carolina surrendered, they were not given the honors of war. Back in the day, the honors of war, they would case their colors. They would play a tune of the winning side of that siege or battle, and just go back and defeat. Well, the Washington wouldn't let them do that. They had to fly their colors and eventually stack them in the middle of the field at the surrender field at Yorktown. And they had to play a tune of a British regimental tune, and they played "The World Turned Upside Down." The war, well, it does end at Yorktown. It doesn't end at Yorktown. Yorktown happens, but still the war goes on for a couple more months. Washington eventually goes and is handed back over to New York, surrendered by the British, and the British leave. Several officers during that time who had not been paid were about to throw a mutiny, and Washington goes and he speaks to his officers, and he bids farewell to them. And a genius political move, he's got a speech in his hands while these guys are just literally planning mutiny a couple minutes before, and he comes in, he says, "Let me read you my farewell address," I'm paraphrasing, of course. And he's like, I can't read. Hopefully y'all will not mind me pulling out my spectacles. I've gone blind as well as poor in service of my country. And the officers, stopped. I mean, they stopped the would-be mutiny.
He did have a way with words, in all honesty. He didn't speak much, but when he did, you listened.
Right. He eventually then goes back to Congress and resigns as commander-in-chief to Congress, saying that I consider it an indispensable duty to close this last solemn act of my official life by commending the entrance of our dearest country to the protection of Almighty God and those who have the superintendence of them to His holy keeping.
Hey, I have a letter on his retirement. I have a couple letters, luckily, on my phone. And it's about his retirement. It took me forever to find it, but he says in this letter, "I'm not only retired from all public employments, but I'm retiring within myself and shall be able to view the solitary walk and trend the path of private life with heartfelt satisfaction. And I will move gently down the stream of life until I sleep with my fathers." So I think that letter shows the clear intent that Washington was very content to go back to Mount Vernon and just live out the rest of his life with what he did. He was very satisfied, and he was very proud of his work that he did for his country. And not to mention, he loved Mount Vernon.
Since 1776, Washington had only spent 10 days at Mount Vernon. So out of 8.5 years, he'd only been home for 10 days. So go ahead.
But he was very content to leave it there, and it wasn't until he got, I think, if I'm thinking correctly, he got called out of retirement more than 3 times. Every time, George Washington never stayed retired. He basically begged for people to stop asking him to do stuff, but he was one of those people where if my country asks me to do it, I shall do it. He retired one time, or this time. He retired a second time, if I'm not mistaken, after he was president over the I can't remember the official name for it, but when they were making the Constitution.
Constitutional Convention of
Constitutional Convention. I had a brain fart. He retired after that. And again, he just wanted to stay home. And then they were like, well, we've put you up for president, my man, and you've won unanimously. So he served that. Then he retired again, and they asked him to serve as the general of the military afterwards.
Yeah, so you left out of retirement. So after it passes, after the Constitution is ratified, in 1788, Washington is the chancellor of William and Mary, which is another parallel to Robert E. Lee's life.
I forgot about that. It's if I'm not mistaken, I studied this a while ago. It's a ceremony figurehead.
Yeah.
He wasn't like Lee, where he actually was involved in the day-to-day, but he did still play a very important role, and as a role that the university to this day still holds in very high regard. And I think he held it till his death.
He did hold it to his death, all throughout the presidency and everything like that. And again, kind of like you were saying, Washington was drafted into being the first president of these United States. He did the best that he could with trying to skate through a newly formed republic with a new document. Let me rephrase that. A new system of laws that a more centralized federal government trying to keep a fledgling nation together. And I don't think anybody could have done any better. Mm-hmm. Despite everything that happened with him, he had a rock star of a cabinet. I mean, Thomas Jefferson as the Secretary of State, and pretty decent vice president in John Adams. Jefferson eventually resigned. His Secretary of the Treasury, America.
That's one thing. That's one fault he had.
Yeah. Everything like that. And of course, because of the clash between differing ideas of, Jefferson and Hamilton continuously clashing back and forth. That's what created the two-party system, which it's not. It's kind of still what we have today.
Yeah, Washington hated that.
Right. He did not like the idea of divisional, divisions with the dividing into a political system like what the Tories and Whigs had over in England. He actually proclaimed November 26th, 1789 as a day of Thanksgiving. Fun fact for you. There, Moosey. Of course, the feuding between Hamilton and Jefferson. There was the whole whiskey rebellion, which was taxed on whiskey. Washington actually commanded troops. Whiskey rebellion. No other president can say that they commanded troops while in
office.
Yeah. There was foreign affairs. When France had its revolution. Washington chose for us to remain, neutral because we could not get involved in the French Revolution. It would have really just, torn us apart. And eventually he ends up getting his second term, and
he got bullied into that term as well. Bless his heart.
Right. But Washington then sets the precedent that lasted until FDR, of the president only serving 2 terms. Um, he
He could have kept that job
oh yeah, he could have set himself up as a king if he wanted to.
because
But he knew that he wanted to get back to Mount Vernon.
yeah, well that's a great reason. But like people think, well, sooner or later he would have made people mad. And yes, Washington was not perfect. He made mistakes in leadership like we all do. But it was because he was so untouchable is the reason it was so significant. Like they didn't attack George Washington during his presidency. They attacked his vice or someone else usually because Washington was considered untouchable. So the fact that he stepped down when he knew that the press wasn't going to attack him, Congress wasn't going to attack him, and he had all the forever the support of the people, he could have stayed in there as long as he wanted. And anything that he did wrong, no one would have blamed on him.
Anyway, Washington ends up resigning, or not resigning, not seeking a third term. And he goes ahead and leaves. And in his farewell address, he says, "Though in reviewing incidents of my administration, I am unconscious of any intentional error, I am nevertheless too sensible of my defects not to think it possible I may have committed many errors. Whatever there may be, I fervently beseech the Almighty to avert or mitigate the evils to which they may tend. I shall also carry with me the hope that my country will never cease to view them with indulgence, and that after 45 years of my life dedicated to its service with an upright zeal, the faults of incompetence abilities will be consigned to oblivion, as myself must be soon to the mansions of rest." Just beautiful. Anyway, Washington retires to Mount Vernon in 1797 and begins devoting his time to being a planter the way he wants to be, and his other business industries, like his distillery.
Yeah, I was about to mention that.
Um, his operations were only minimally profitable. His lands to the west were constantly under Native American attacks. They yielded little income. Squatters refused to pay rent. He tried to sell them, but nobody wanted to buy them. And he began slowly becoming a Federalist. He vocally supported the Alien and Seditions Act.
Not a lot of people talk about this,
Yeah.
but people that were on Washington's cabinet, and I'm not going to say Washington is without fault, just like John Adams, but they were both, in my opinion, from the documents I have read, the letters, they were both kind of bullied into that position to kind of being like, well, okay.
Well, Washington at the end of the day was a nationalist,
He was.
and began tending more towards federalism towards the end and after he got out of public life. But I mean, but at that time he was a private citizen. He tried to, do some other stuff. I mean, essentially, it's Washington tried to retire, but his heart was still in it. He still kept, in contact with some of his political former running mates, or I say running mates. When tensions with France really started getting picked up and the quasi war was happening, Washington offered his services to the army as commander, and was actually nominated him for lieutenant general commission on July 4th, 1798, and position of commander in chief of the armies. Washington accepted it, serving from July 13th, 1789 till his death. He participated in planning for a provisional army. And it just kept trying, just in case that happened. But the war never happened, so. Washington was thought to be wealth, but everybody looking back into it, it was a very glorified facade. Um, he never recovered from the revolution, but he did his best that he could. On December 12th, 1799, Washington was inspecting his farms on horseback, and he had returned late and had guests over for dinner. Washington complained that he had a sore throat, but was still well enough to mark trees for cutting. That evening, though, Washington complained of chest congestion, but his mood was still cheerful. On Saturday rather, he awoke to an inflamed throat, difficult breathing, and ordered for somebody to remove a pint of blood because bloodletting was all the rage back then. His family summoned the local doctor, then another doctor, then another doctor, and then a fourth doctor. They couldn't, determine what was the matter with him. They kept trying to do bloodletting. Eventually, 5 pints of blood. His condition deteriorated further. I don't understand why. Another doctor proposed they do a tracheotomy. But the other doctors were like, "Hey, I don't know what that means, so let's not do it." Finally, doctors fed up, or Washington's fed up, and he just says to the doctors to leave. And he tells his family doctor, who was one of the first ones called, that doctor, I die hard, but I'm not afraid to go. Washington, his death came more quickly than it was expected. It was between 10 and 11 p.m. on December 14th, 1799. Martha was seated at the foot of his bed, and his last words were, "'Tis well." And then they were talking about where he wanted to be buried, and he said that. And he passed away at 67. When word finally reached Congress, they immediately went into mourning over the news of Washington's death. The speaker's chair was shrouded in black cloth. The funeral was held on December 18th, 1799 at Mount Vernon, where his body was interred. Cavalry and foot soldiers led the procession. 6 colonels served as pallbearers. The Mount Vernon funeral, though, service was restricted mostly to friends and family. Episcopal service, of course. But Light Horse Harry Lee, Robert E. Lee's dad, was chosen to deliver the eulogy, and that's where we get first in war, first in peace, first in heart of his countrymen. So that's George Washington.
I don't think we could end it any better than off that quote.
Well, yeah, and I don't think we can talk about it anymore because, well, that's kind of his death. Yep. Oh, George Washington was a Freemason.
Yeah, I actually figured that out for the first time the other day. I regularly just study random history, and I was studying George Washington's faith and, of course, the Lord. And I stumbled upon his Freemasonry.
Not a religion.
No, it's not a religion. Let's see here. Do we want to just go ahead and end it and say goodbye and tell everybody to tune in?
Sure.
All right. Well, please make sure to share this episode out. Of course, sharing it out, make sure we reach all new types of audiences, and episodes like this are a great way to expand our audience. So please share to all American Revolutionary War supported groups and maybe some Confederate Revolutionary War. Who knows? Make sure to tune in this Thursday at 7 p.m. Confederate Standard Time for Commander's Comments. We'll have our Chief of Heritage Operations, Mr. Ron Kennedy, on, and our Commander-in-Chief, Jason Boshiers, and they'll be talking about a lot of great things. And I believe that's it. They'll be talking about something on the Great Seal.
Yeah.
Oh, his impact will always be felt, Commander. And remember, the Pilgrimage and Homecoming event is this Saturday at Elton Springs.
I'm
And
looking
I'm sure,
forward to the Kentucky Derby party.
and the Kentucky Derby party. Make sure you come out and support both events. It'll be a great time. And of course, SCV Chat will be live on location, as always, broadcasting the event. And maybe a couple videos from the Kentucky Derby party. Let's see how serious we all are at that point in the day.
Yeah, no. Go ahead and put a big no on that one.
You're taking your relaxation time, aren't you?
The Kentucky Derby is my Super Bowl.
All right, well.
One sporting event of the year I actively look forward to every single year. The past couple of years, I've had to listen to the race. This year, I get to watch the race. I am very happy. I'm glad that Adam has polished the silver for the mint julep punch. I will be bringing my own mint julep mixers, though, or just stuff to make.
I don't know anything about any of this.
Yeah, good. Yeah.
Stay Southern.
No Fumar.
No
But no, remember, oh yeah, there's the Great Seal.
Just a great seal.
It's George Washington.
Joe
On a horse, fully grown. And Franklin's.
That's how he was born, fully grown on a horse, right?
Well, according to the musical 1776, John Adams said Franklin did this, Franklin did that, Franklin did some other damn thing. Franklin smote the ground, and out came George Washington, fully grown and on his horse. Franklin then electrified them with his magnificent lightning rod, and the three of them, Washington, Franklin, and the horse, won the revolution.
No Fumar in the elevator.
Remember to check out our partner shows, the Look Around Southwest Florida, the Douglas Southall Freeman group on Friday nights, Michael Hardy's Historical Chat on Sunday evenings, the Alamo City Guard Check, the stuff that Vinny's doing in Monuments Across Dixie. Guys, we just completed Confederate Heritage Month, but really it's Confederate Heritage can't be relegated to only 30 days. It's 365. So do something for your heritage. Get out there in your communities. Think locally, act locally, and if you're coming up in a election cycle like some places are, remember to vote for those candidates which share your ideals as well as those of pro-Southern history. Those are my opinions. Those are my comments, not necessarily those belonging to the GEC and other subsidiaries. Carl, I don't think Thomas Franklin invented electricity. I think that he just stuck his finger in an electrical socket a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, he hasn't been well recently.
No, that running into that ice cream truck really sent him on a loop.
Hopefully he starts feeling better before reunion. I hate for him to miss. I know he said he doesn't know if he's going to make it yet, but he got the hotel room reserved since last year.
Did he? Not even going to go there. Not even going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Guys, remember,
he reserved the right dates this year?
Yeah, I'm not going to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Guys, remember, again, Thursday with Commander's Comments. Look forward to seeing everybody there. Look forward to seeing everybody at Elm Springs this weekend. I've got to go buy a tree because I think that's what they want, are trees this year in lieu of floral tributes. Still buying a tree. Until next time, in the words of the late and great Harold Philpotts, no Fumar in the elevator.
No Fumar in the elevator.